Welcome back to another episode of the Collaborative IEP podcast. I'm Ashley Barlow, your host, and I am so happy you are here. Friends, this is an example of me being wildly independent. I promised you I would get you an episode of about school choice, and I am. I think I said, and I totally intended, to find you somebody that knows more about this than I do just by nature, as opposed to me who had to read like 15 articles and overthink this and then like ridiculously oversimplify it, which is what has happened. So I intended to have somebody on where I could ask a bunch of questions and I still want to, but here's the thing, I need your help. I can't find anybody. And it's like, yeah, that's me. I will talk about it. So if you know a lawyer or a policy person or a parent that's impacted and knows enough, or parent that isn't impacted and knows enough, a teacher, an administrator, a anybody who can talk about school choice, uh, I'm your girl. I want to talk to them. So please let me know if you have them. Send me a message, DM me, and we'll get them on and continue this conversation. But for now, what we're going to do is I have outlined for you kind of like the do's and don'ts. And like not the do's and don'ts, like the 411, just the like basic information about school choice. And I'm gonna give it to you in like clear, plain language according to a bunch of articles I read. And even then I went into some some like executive orders and new laws. And then I backed myself way back out and was like, hang on a second, this is not what people want. So I've kind of been all over the place over the last 3 nights looking at school choice because I was like, I promised that I have to give it to the people. Also, this episode is probably going to end up to be fairly quick, and that is because I'm short on time because unfortunately Rachel can't read my mind anymore. Rachel's my creative director. She's just incredible. And we have many instances where she has read my mind. This time I must have just sent a thing into the universe and thought it might land on her desk because I told her nothing about this, but I intended for last week's episode to be a two-parter and it was a one-parter. I never told her. So anyway, I didn't schedule time for this. And so here we go. We're going to talk about school choice and mainly what it means for kids on IEPs and 504s. And that's the way of looking at it is school choice and vouchers, who gets left behind. So here's the big deal. Like imagine if your kids' supports were no longer mandated by law. Imagine if speech and PT and their behavior supports and their modified work suddenly moved with them to a new school and the school wasn't required to provide them. Or imagine that they stayed at their school, but the vast majority of the peers that they know as friends and acquaintances and school peers have moved on to someplace else. That is a real possibility for school choice. And I want to talk about that, not in a manner that is like scare tactics, but in a real possibility thing. So in this episode, I really want to explain what school choice is, how it's like happening now, what's happening with school choice, how it is and could impact students with disabilities that are on IEPs and 504 plans, and what parents can do. Okay. So that's kind of our goal here. So let's start off with what is school choice. And like, you better believe I've got this outlined because again, it ends up to be something that I could be able to do. But like, I went down a big, long rabbit hole because I don't feel super knowledgeable about this topic. Okay. Like without a script. So school choice, there's basically like three different, let's call them mechanisms where school choice can happen. The main idea is that we are privatizing public school or we are taking supports and services and money away from public schools and funneling them or encouraging or making it available to go to private schools. Okay. And so that's like the main idea. And then there's these three different mechanisms. So the first mechanism is vouchers. And with vouchers, what happens is we take public funds, we take government money, and we pay that to families, and then families can use that at private schools. Okay. So the government, like your state, would say, hey, here's money that you can use at a private school. I practice in Ohio. Ohio has these things called scholarships. There's one called the Autism Scholarship. And if your child has autism, you can take money from the state of Ohio and you can use that at a private school. And therefore, there are a fair amount of private schools in Ohio that cater to autistic students or students with stereotypical autistic profiles. The second mechanism is ESAs, educational savings accounts, similar to an HSA. So, an educational savings account, what happens is public funds get put into account that families can spend on private tuition and also private tutors, therapies, and materials. Okay. So, like in this idea, we're taking public money and we're putting it in this little account, very much like an HSA, and then that money can go towards private schools and other educational materials. And then we have this idea of tax credits, tax diversion, stuff that is tied to the IRS. This is probably one of the reasons why nobody likes to talk about this, because this is an intimidating topic to anybody. Taxes, IRS stuff, tax credits. Who in the heck knows what that means? Certainly not a teacher turned lawyer. But basically, what happens here is that people, Americans, can redirect tax dollars to scholarship organizations, and those scholarship organizations will in turn pay for private school for Americans. So, anybody can donate money to these scholarship funds and you get a tax benefit for doing it, like when you give a charitable donation. So it's a tax strategy for some. You aren't doing it for your own family. You're donating money to these scholarship programs and getting a tax benefit from it. And then other people, and you could apply for scholarships and use the scholarship money towards private funding. Towards private schools. This approach was recently expanded in the big beautiful bill that the Trump administration got through, a few weeks ago. So those are three mechanisms: vouchers, ESAs, and the tax deferral, tax scholarship credits. Okay. So what's this look like in practice? What's being proposed? What's being implemented? Now, my thumb isn't anywhere close to being up, and it gave me a thumbs up. And I don't want this to be a thumbs up. Frankly, I try to be extremely fair in these messages, but I would like to give it a thumbs down if I'm being perfectly honest. Anyway, sometimes you got to be a little quippy. You know what? That was a nice distraction. No, let's keep going. I was going to take a break, but we're going to keep going. So how would this look in practice? What is happening now and what could happen in the near future? So families are going to be able to use this money to fund, obviously, private schools and other private services like tutors and materials and that kind of thing. So we have this administration, the Trump administration, has said in many different ways, in executive orders and press conferences and various policy documents and via the big beautiful bill, that they would like to expand federal support for, let's call them state supported private schooling options, right? So the federal government has said, hey, we want school choice and we want states to support school choice. And so what the federal government's doing is they're creating pathways such that they can help the states to implement school choice programming. This is already happening. For instance, like a concrete example that I read about is happening in Nebraska. They recently, like that big beautiful bill just went through, and they have already said, yes, please, we want to do the scholarship program. There was quite a bit of opposition by voters to school choice in Nebraska, and still yet Nebraska's state government has already expanded their or started the tax credit mm, program relative to funding scholarships. So this can happen very, very quickly. So when the expansion happened via the big beautiful bill, the Trump administration gave states a deadline and said, "Hey, you need to tell us by certain time if you're going to opt in or opt out of this." And I recently had a social media post that showed those numbers to date, but the deadline had not yet passed. So dozens of states have already said yes to school choice, and several have also said no to school choice. So many bills were already pending relative to expanding school choice in many different states. There's an organization called Future Ed, Futured, right? And but Future capital ED, so it looks like Future Ed. And in 2025, they tracked hundreds of bills that would expand school choice alone, right? Just in 2025. So those things were obviously already in the works. Mm, But that's, kind of what's happening across the country. Some are saying yes, some are saying no. Goes largely along red state, blue state party lines. So stereotypically, blue states are saying no to school choice, and red states are saying yes to school choice. Doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure that out. So I'll just go ahead and state it. I don't know enough, and I did not research enough to say which blue states in the last presidential election have not. I don't know that. We'd need Steve Kornacki to tell us that, and or some other data person, and I don't know who that is. But I do like Hacky. If you don't know who that is, then never mind. But know that I only watch the Today Show. So what's interesting is some of these programs that have already started are targeted, like, available scholarships and programming is only available to people with certain disabilities or people with certain income thresholds or people from certain areas, like rural areas or kids in failing schools. Like Ohio also already had a program where if your school was failing, so to speak, then you got money toward private schooling. And I mean, I'll tell you, that's like a really kind of crazy program because people live in $1 million homes, but their public school would be failing. And so they get a credit to use at a private school. And that's like a hack that people use. Honestly, if they move to Ohio to go to pu- private school, they will just move to a neighborhood with nice houses and a failing public school, and they get like $13,000 off of their tuition. It might be a different number, but at one point, that's what the number was. So, I mean, now we're like the statistics don't match up on that, right? So these rules and the targeted populations vary largely state to state, community to community, disability to disability, et cetera. And that's the point there. That's a great place for our first break. So let's take a break. Hi, friends. It's Ashley. And I know IEP advocacy can feel overwhelming, especially when you're trying to figure out what to say, what to ask for, and how to get the team on board. That's why I created the IEP Guru Academy, a collection of short, practical videos designed to help you navigate real challenges at the IEP table with confidence and on your timeline. There are 3 powerful series each one laser focused on what parents and advocates need most. First, we have when the school says this, the IEP guru says this. Learn exactly how to respond when the team says things like, your child is doing fine with the current supports, or we don't have data for that. Number 2, the inclusion series. Get real strategies for advocating for inclusion, even when behavior, disability category, or school pushback are making it hard. And number 3, negotiation, collaboration, and teamwork. Build your leadership skills and learn how to foster real teamwork. These videos focus on communication strategies and real, tried and true negotiation tools to help the whole IEP team work better together. Each video is about 12 minutes long and comes with a workbook full of communication templates, checklists, and actionable strategies. You can grab videos for just $9 each or bundle 3 for $19. And if you're a member of the Collaborative IEP membership, you get them for free. Visit the website, thecollaborativeiep.com/guru, and get the targeted help you need on your schedule, at your pace, and for your child. So then the big question here is, how does this impact students with disabilities, right? And so, I want to talk like kind of legally first. So we've got IDEA and 504 and the ADA and other laws that impact students with disabilities. Now, when we walked through IDEA, one thing that I said several times was that budgeting and funding of federal programs is in and of itself its own beast. And there are budget experts. I am certainly not a budget expert, so I'm not going to speak to budget, but I can speak kind of generally about budgeting. And this is what I will say. So public schools are bound by IDEA and 504. And that, is identifying like child fine, that is providing services, that is providing the safeguards, that is all of the things that IDEA and 504 mandate. Add evaluating to that list because it's in my outline and I want to make sure I say everything that's in my outline because I worked hard on it. Private schools that accept public funds do, generally speaking, have to follow, and this is where things get tricky, and I don't want to misstate things, but they do have to follow. Okay? They do have to follow those laws. But in certain cases, not in the same exact way as public schools that are publicly funded. So not in the same way. Obligations, let's just say it this way, obligations depend on state law and the funding mechanism itself, which is a very, very nuanced. Basically, what's going to happen is there are gaps. Funding is going to drive what the placement is, and it's going to create gaps. It took me a long time to be able to write that and to say that, which also means this is going to be highly litigated. And guess what litigation is? Expensive and time consuming. So it's also going to take us a very long time to figure out what any of this means, which is going to be expensive. And we're going to need parents that are willing to take the risk of litigating things in order to create law, which is hopefully good law, right? So we're going to need parents with good cases to create these things. And then we're going to have to litigate all the little nuances once we get a good baseline of what the federal and state laws say. And it could vary state to state depending on the funding mechanisms in every state. So practically what happens is then we've got a staff. So I want to tell you that there are a lot of private schools and, parochial schools, schools affiliated with different religions, just straight up, country day schools, Montessori schools, private schools that are like, yeah, we want to educate students with disabilities. We want to educate students with like run of the mill dyslexia and really pervasive dyslexia that impacts like lots and lots of academic tasks and success and achievement. We want to educate kids with, you know, uh, uh, behavioral things like ADHD. We want to educate kids with behaviors that impact them moderately or severely in school. We want to educate this subset of students kind of stereotypically. And just as a caveat, I really try to say more words as opposed to like moderate and severe students or something like that. So I try to say students whose disability impacts them more significantly or something like that. But in short, like what subsets are they targeting? And it's important that we do lump people into different categories so that schools know what they're looking for, right? Like, and this is the whole point that we're making. So that happens already without this school choice kind of push that's happening. But what happens a lot of times, like really, really frequently, is they take a kid. They're like, we'll educate a kid with Down syndrome. We've had their 4 older siblings or something like that. And we really want to, and we really love them. And they seem like they would be a great fit in this school and it aligns with all of our values. And then the kid gets there and they don't have the resources to support the kid. And that happens all the time. So, what is very concerning about this is whether or not private schools are going to have the staffing to staff all of the specialized services that need to happen, whether that's related services like OT, PT, speech, school psychs, and those folks, behaviorists. I mean, think of all the people that weigh in on an IEP, but also the skill set. So, the ability to identify, to find, to evaluate, and also to provide the services. They are going to be bound by those obligations under IDEA, but will they have the resources to do them? And that's a really significant question. So, this obviously is going to impact students disproportionately. If you're in schools with those resources, then you're going to be great. If you're in schools without those resources, then you aren't going to be great. And as we know, statistically speaking, research tells us that this will have a more negative effect on schools that are already underfunded and states that don't have good funding. So disproportionality becomes a big issue. Another issue is who's left in for lack of a better term, the wasteland of public schools, right? Because there are going to be many, many places where public schools, are just kind of like mediocre places. And so lots of kids are going to go out. They're going to go out to private schools. They're going to go out because they don't enjoy their public school. They're going to go out because in their area, private schools are going to target them, right? Private schools are going to get really specialized, in my best guess. So we're going to have private schools that target kids that are interested in different fields of study, like STEM and creative and performing arts and literary arts. And heck, there might be, things as specialized as like journalism or whatever. And then the kids that are going to get left in public schools are also going to be in environments that don't look anything like the real world, right? Because it's going to be a bunch of kids that are on IEPs and kids whose parents don't know to advocate for them to go elsewhere, and or kids that don't get accepted elsewhere. And that certainly doesn't look like the real life. Never mind, we come back to the staffing thing. And now we have to staff double the amount of schools because we have to staff private schools and we have to staff public schools. And so, do we have enough PTs and OTs and speech pathologists and psychologists and behavior support people and all of the people to staff private and public schools? So, a big concern is staffing, services, and what is left in our public school communities. Another concern is that things like child find and other data driven decision making mechanisms will break down when students move to the private settings, right? Because those are all processes that are only on public schools right now. And so, like, if private schools also have to participate in child fine, we're going to lose kids because we're going to be like, well, I thought the public school had them. I thought the private school had them. So, those processes are inevitably going to have communication gaps because that stuff happens. I did do a little bit of research on this, and honestly, the academic outcomes are mixed. Some studies do find benefits in certain contexts. Others, and the majority of them, find the effect to be either flat or negative. But from a disability standpoint, the key question is not only academics, but also access to our legally mandated supports and services and processes, in addition to the lack of discrimination that we get in our anti-discrimination laws. So that's another big concern. So let's go ahead and take our second break here.
Hi, friends. It's Ashley, and I wanted to let you in on something that can seriously change the game when it comes to your IEP advocacy. It's called the Collaborative IEP Membership. Sometimes we call it ABC Club. And it's packed with resources to make your IEP meetings easier, less stressful, and way more effective. Here's what you get: my complete IEP binder. This baby includes monthly drops of communication templates, guides, and checklists to keep you organized and on top of things. Access to our full inclusion workshop, behavior workshop, and negotiation workshops. These are deep dives that give you real strategies you can actually use. And with the membership, you get all of our IEP Guru Academy videos. Short, practical videos that will answer the exact questions you're asking right now. Every month, we'll also drop new content like how to navigate PDA with your neurodivergent child, or exactly how to ask for Orton Gillingham reading instruction, so you're never left guessing. The membership is $29 a month or $297 for the entire year, and you can try it risk-free with a 3-day trial. Head over to the website, thecollaborativeiep.com/membership, and join us today. Let's make your next IEP meeting your best one yet.
All right, I think it's only fair to talk about pros and cons that other people talk about with school choice incentives and programs. And then I've got some tips to close this out. So, if you are a proponent of school choice, here are things that you say are positives: more control for parents, more parental control because you get choice. I think everybody likes choice. Competition, right? Like, schools are going to compete against one another. Scores are going to, you aren't stuck where you are. Scores are going to become more and more important. And specific tailored programming. So, you can go to a STEM school, you can go to a um, school that is more specialized. One counter argument, I've got counter arguments to all those things, but one thing I will say is, in the last 10 years, school choice in public schools has become much more broad, right? Like, lots of districts have open enrollment, lots of districts have STEM programs, and schools more like magnet schools or specialized schools where students can apply and go. So that is happening in a lot of places. Counter arguments to school choice, if I haven't already stated them, or if you can't read between the lines, obviously we've got diversion of funds away from public schools, potential loss or reduction of protections by IDEA 504 and the ADA, exclusion or underserving of students with disabilities significantly, which in turn could or could not be legally deemed as discriminatory. Um, Weakening or undermining of accountability and data transparency on those data driven decision making policies and strategies. Potential to segregate by ability, which we have talked about as well. And like the falling between the gaps of the right hand and the left hand not talking to one another. So, what can we do about it as parents if we are concerned about it? I think that the primary thing is to ask questions, right? So, ask whether a private school accepting funds is mandated to follow your child's IEP and ask all of the specifics. So, next, get everything in writing, right? Like maybe the IEP document won't be as helpful. So get written commitments on services, staff qualifications, measurable goals, and do private contracts in addition to that public IEP. Confirm payment. Who's going to pay for related services? Who's going to pay for transportation? Who's going to pay for the evaluations? Who's going to do those things? What are the names of any of their contractors? Is any of that available here on other campuses for the private school, etc.? I think it's really, really important to ramp up record keeping if you're in a state where there is privatized schooling. So evaluations, IEPs, progress monitoring, communication, like notes back and forth, etc. Because these things are going to go from school to school and we might lose records along the way. So I hope that that's helpful. It is about as deep into the topic as I'm willing to get. And I'm going to reiterate my request that you connect me with anybody that you know that would like to help take this conversation to the next level so that I can learn and you all can learn as well. I will see you next week, same time, same place. Have a great